Hey guys, today we're going to be implementing live search in Angular. Now the requests will be sent to a server running NodeJS, which in turn will query MongoDB to get back the relevant data in relation to our query. So that's how we're displaying pair now when we just typed in PE for our query, because obviously pair extends from what we've already typed in. Now if we type in something where there is no match, then it tells us that that's the case. And also spaces won't affect our queries either, as you can see, and neither do capitals. So if creating this interests you, then keep on watching. So we start this project in a new empty project folder, and I will launch up a terminal inside that project folder. With the terminal, I will use the ng-new command, and I'll create a new Angular project. I'll call it frontend so that we can contrast it with a folder called backend inside this root project folder later on when we get to creating the backend. And I'll also use the verbose command just because for some reason it seems to fix some of the errors that I have with creating an Angular application. I'm not entirely sure why, but we'll just choose no for rooting because this isn't a real application, it only has the search feature. And then I'll choose SCSS for the style sheet format because it's got nice nesting syntax. Okay, now that it's installed, we should have this folder created called frontend, and we'll navigate to it in our terminal using the cd command. Once we're inside the frontend folder, I'll launch up my source code editor of choice inside that frontend folder. For this example, I'll be using VS Code, but obviously you can use the source code editor of your choice. And we'll zoom in here so that you can see this a lot better. And then I will delete everything contained inside this app component view file, and I'll replace it with a very simple header which simply says live root search. Next, I'll go to the global style sheet, and then we'll create some global styles. And what we will do here, essentially, we're just bringing in some uniformity to all of our elements and consistency so they don't act erratically. And then we will set the font family of all our elements inside our body that obviously contain text. Because we've brought in a custom font, we'll need to go to it, so we'll go to Google CDN Poppins. And we'll just get it here. We're just getting it because it looks nice, I think anyway. It's probably my favourite font of all time. So we'll copy it there, we don't need that anymore. Then we will actually go to the index.html file where our Angular application actually gets mounted. We'll just paste it in there. You can close that now, don't really need to do anything in there. Next we'll go back to our app component view, and we'll create the rest of the markup that we'll be using throughout this tutorial. So we'll have a text input, its name will be search box, and instead of an ID we'll give it a class so that we can target it easily for styling. Below this we will create a section, and that will also have a class. Search results, create it like so, and that's all the styling the markup that we need for now. As for the style sheet for this app component, we'll go to that now. And we'll create the styling. Again, I won't dwell on this too much because this isn't really a styling tutorial. You know why you clicked on this tutorial, and that's to learn about live search and asynchronous communication using Ajax. So again, I'll just type all of this in just that you can see it, but I won't really dwell on it because we don't want it to take up too much time of the video. So we'll sense that horizontally using auto margins. And then we'll say you can't exceed 600 pixels, but on screen sizes smaller than 600 pixels, UB 95% of the body, which is the parent container for that instance. And then we'll do the same here. and this will also be centered with 20 pixels margin on top, so that there's some consistency. And then inside we will style the HR, make it really thin by setting it to have no border. And then the paragraph, again, both the paragraph and the HR, these classes or styles will only be applied to the HR and paragraphs that are actually inside the search results in the markup file. So I think that's time that we actually see what this looks like. So in our terminal, we'll type in ng serve, and then we use the open flag to open it up automatically in our browser. Okay, so this is the finished result. Actually, I just realized I haven't showed you what the paragraph and HR looked like. So I'll just show you now real quick. Again, this is just dummy. Obviously, these won't actually be in the finished version. But as you can see, that's what the individual results will look like. Again, we'll delete this now because it was just dummy data. What we now want to do is to call a method every time the user releases their key on this input. And that will simply give us access to the most up-to-date value held in this text input as soon as they've released their key. And that's the reason why we pass in the event, so that we can actually get access to the value held inside this input. Now we're currently getting an error, and that's because this sendData function doesn't actually exist. So to solve that issue, we'll need to we can delete this, we'll go to the app component, and then we'll need to create this method. The events will be any type, because there's no way to predict what type of event it will be. If you go back, as you can see, we're now no longer getting that error. And inside, we will just for demonstration purposes, we will log event.target.value. Because remember, target is the element that triggered the event, and then the value is obviously the value of the input. So now if we refresh, go to our console, and then we type things in. As you can see, we are getting the data that we typed in to this input. Another thing that I should actually mention is probably go back to our global styles, and inside I'll just copy and paste the styling, and this will again induce some uniformity between our form elements, including our input element. As you can see, again, we really don't need that anymore, so we can close it. And now, as you can see, it's actually using the font that we set everything to use on the body, so it looks a lot better now. We will now begin to actually send the post request to the server, but before we can do that, there's a module that we need to import, which is essential for sending HTTP requests. Without it, you wouldn't be able to send any. So we will include the location first, so that the AutoComplete is a lot easier to work with. And then it's called HTTP client module. So we'll import it like that, and then we'll add it to the import. Okay, we could close this now because we no longer need it. So once we've imported the HTTP module, we will launch up a new terminal, and we will use it to generate a new service, and it will be called post. So ng generate service post. There we go, we create it like so. As you can see, there it is, we created it, and we should be able to find it. Sorry, that's the testing. We'll find it here. Inside, we will import the HTTP client service, so we're injecting a service into a service. Sorry, whoops. So it's a bit hard to get the strings right sometimes, but there we go. Now the autocomplete will be a lot easier. There you go, inside the constructor, it'll be private, instantiated to a private property. It'll be called HTTP, and it will be of type HTTP client, that's where it will be instantiated from. And we'll be able to, we'll have access to a global instantiation of this service thanks to this injectable here, which is handily created for us automatically. And what we'll now do, actually, now will be a good time to show you the Mongo database that I've already got set up. So we'll launch up MongoD, and that will launch up the MongoDB server. In another terminal, I'll launch up Mongo, so that's where our database. So show DBS, I get the commands wrong. So, and then we type in use fruit live search, because that's the database that I'm using. and then show collections. And then, so here we go, we've got a collection already called fruit. So let's see what's in there. As you can see, it's all the fruits that we'll be searching through later on. Type in it for more so that you can see every single one of them. And as you can see, there's two fields, ID. Well, the ID is automatically created for us by MongoDB. But the name, this is the most important one. Obviously, it's the name of the fruit. It's what we'll actually be searching through. So in relation to this, we will create a schema so that we have a type to base our query data on, and it has two fields. Both of them are strings, again, same name as the data in the database because that's where it'll be coming from. Okay, so we progressed far enough that we are now able to create the backend. So inside our root project folder, we will create a backend folder alongside our frontend folder. And inside this backend, I'll actually launch up a new VS Code window. Again, we've got a separate one for our front end and now one for our back end as well. Inside, actually, so in this terminal that we launched up in the backend folder, we need to initialize npm, and we do that with npm init. Again, the Y flag to speed things up, automatically say yes for everything. And whilst we're at it, we'll install two dependencies. Those will be Express and Mongoose. Install them like so, and then whilst those are being installed, we will create a new file. We'll create a new file, call it server.js, and inside the package.json we need to change the main to the file that we actually created, and we'll also create a script called start, and this will start server.js with NodeMon. Again, if you don't have NodeMon, you do actually need to install it, and you can install it globally just with npm I NodeMon with the G flags that it's automatically installed for all projects. And inside we will create, again we need to zoom in so that you can actually see. Yeah, so inside we will create the boilerplate code that every NodeJS server uses, that uses Express anyway. Again, not too complicated. Initialized Express app. And then we set it to listen either on an environment variable if one has been set, in our case no, so it will go to 3000 hard coded. Now 3000 is actually kind of important because remember our Angular app is on port 4200, and we'll actually be able to send requests. Even though they're both on the local server, because they're on different ports, we'll be able to communicate between the two things simply because of the fact that they're on two different ports. And now that this boilerplate code has been created, we will now start our backend. We'll say npm run start, because remember we created the start script, and as you can see we're getting this text, so we know that the backend is now running. As for connecting our backend with our Mongo database, we will create a separate file to do this, just so that we can abstract things out a bit, and so that we can reduce the weight. Reduce the weight on the main server file. Inside, we will require Mongoose, because remember we installed it along with Express. Below that, we will create the fruit schema using the import, and this schema must represent the data in the collection that we want to be querying. So the ID, we don't need to include that because MongoDB creates that for us automatically, but we do need to include the name property since that is set to a unique value by us based on obviously what the fruit is, and we set it to be an object. Well, its type is a string. Sorry, well, it needs to be capital actually. Sorry, this isn't TypeScript. It does need to be capital, and it's required, which means it's true, which means that we can't submit a fruit without filling out this name property. And then once we've created that schema, we'll need to export it, except we won't be exporting the actual schema, we'll be exporting the model. Remember, the model is what we'll be using to query our collection in this case, because the collection's already been created. So we'll export it like so. Back in our main file, we'll import it, and we'll import the model to fruit. Remember, it gets assigned because of the fact that we exported it. And whilst we're at it, we'll also bring in Mongoose now into this file, because although it is required in the other file, it won't be available on this one. And we will need to, we've just imported it so that we can actually connect to our MongoDB, which is currently running because we ran mongod, so that we can connect to it now. So MongoDB localhost, because that's where it's located. And remember, I showed you at the start, the actual database name is called Fruit Live Search, so we'll connect to it like that. And to fix the deprecation warnings, again, whether or not these warnings exist for when you're watching this video is based on the current version, or based on when you're watching this video really. These deprecation warnings change over time, and once we've done that, we will assign the Mongoose connection to a variable. And we do this so that we can log a couple things. Just, it makes things a lot easier for testing, so we know if there's an error. If there ever is an error, then we'll just log that error, and so that we know that we are connected without any errors to our MongoDB database. When we open for the first time, we will console.log connected like so. And so now if we go to NodeMon, we press restart, just so you can see that from scratch. Do it again. I don't know why it's not working, but as you can see, connected, we are getting that. Now, if you don't have a database set up, then write the database that you want to create there. And the collection name will be fruits, because the model is fruit and it changes the string a bit so that it's relevant to a collection. And then what you'll need to do is, actually we'll close down. If you do want to fill out an empty database, or sorry, a non-existent database with values, then you need to close down NodeMon, because that will interfere with this process. And you'll need to make this callback method asynchronous. And then you'll say if, you'll need to await, because we are querying the database now. And then we'll say count documents. And then once you've executed, once you executed that query, if it's greater than 0, then we'll return. So we won't do what we're going to do here if there are documents already in this database. But else, if there are no documents in this database because either it doesn't exist or just because there simply aren't any in this database, then we will use fruit, and then we will say create, and then name, Apple. And remember, all these are promises because all these are asynchronous tasks. And then again, if we wanted to add another one, we'll just do it like that, and then there you go, mango is another one. And then once you are done, this then callback. So once all of these promises have been finished, you can do an asynchronous and then do what you want inside this console.log or inside this callback. So that's how you would do it, and then obviously you would start NodeMon, and then that would just run for the first time. And then once all these have been submitted or posted to the database, then this wouldn't work even if we restarted our server, because now we would actually find documents, so it would be greater than 0. But anyway, for now I'll just remove async, and then we'll go back to what it was before. So we'll say console.log connected to Mongoose like so, and then restart our NodeMon server like so. Now we should get that message, yep, connected to Mongoose, so we know that things are working. Next, we want our app to be able to receive and send JSON data, and to do that we simply set our app to use the JSON which comes from Express. And then we also, well, we don't really need it, but it's just good practice to configure our app to allow our server to be able to work with extended data, which is what this URL encoder does. So just opens things up as to what data our server can actually work with. And our actual server will have a single root handler, because again, it's not really a real application, it's simply just a live search example. So it only requires one root handler, and it's this request one to /get root. Sorry, it's this post one. So it handles a post request to /get root. Open up the callback like so. And what we'll do, we'll extract the data which should have been sent on the post body on the payload property. And then we will send it back. Remember, we're sending back JSON, which is the reason why we send back an object, and this will automatically be passed into JSON data. And we'll set payload like so. And for now, this is just testing purposes. We will send back the data that the user posted to this route, so that we just know that things are working as they should. Now, back in our Angular project, we'll need to create a new file. We will call it proxy.conf. Remember, that's not a typo, it actually is conf, not config. That threw me off at first. And because it's JSON, obviously, we follow the JSON format. And what we're doing here is essentially we are proxying or redirecting all requests to the /API route to be the local host on port 3000. So HTTP, because remember that's where our backend, our NodeJS backend, is located, on localhost on port 3000. So any route that begins with so what the rule here is, any route that begins with /API but it can have anything after that. We set the target to be, so where the query is actually being sent to be localhost 3000, and so that this actually works, we will target the starting endpoint parameter and we will simply replace it with an empty string. So that's only the things that come after, that originally came after the /API will be essentially be appended to localhost 3000, and so that's how we will easily get request proxied to our backend. Again, we can close this now. We now need to create a method that will actually send the post request to that get root endpoint. So we'll create it like so. It will be called search route. It will take in a argument of a string, and that will just be the user's what they've typed into that text input. And then we will use the HTTP private property that we have injected, and we will send the request to /API. Remember, /API is important because it needs to be proxied to the local host. And also, actually, whilst we're at it, we will set a type. So what we expect to get back from the server, we expect to get back a object, because remember it will be, well, it will be originally be in JSON, but then it'll be passed from JSON into a JavaScript object. I have that payload property that we set. Remember, inside we will have an array of fruit. That's what we have originally, but for now we will simply have, actually we won't even have an array of fruit, we will simply have a string. That's what we'll end up having though. We'll need to set it back to that later on. But remember, this is just the test for now. What we'll now do is, again, we'll set the data that needs to be actually sent to the server. And remember, it has that payload property because the server needs to extract that payload property. And then inside we'll just put the string argument. And then lastly, we'll set some headers on this. And it's very important that we set the headers because we need the request or the body to be in JSON format, because that's what our Node.js server is configured to handle the body data as. So what we need to do alongside HTTP client, actually, we will import HTTP headers, because it's actually its own object. And then we will set the header as follows: content type application/JSON, and that's the standard header. What we will now do, actually, along with what I've already done, we'll import an operator from our RxJS. It's called map. Again, if you don't know what RxJS is, then that's a whole another topic. I won't explain it now because it's far too much to explain right now. But anyway, the pipe method on the initial request is where we include operators for the observable, which is what this request is. So the data that we get back will be a JSON object, and then we will simply, in the map operator, we will simply extract the payload property from the data, which is JSON format. So the actual subscription to this observable will only get back the data that was originally contained in the payload of the response, and not the actual JSON object, because remember, we only need the payload. So that's the reason why we use this here, just that we could simplify things, and we return this so that this observable can be subscribed to receive this data, this payload data. It can be subscribed to in the component, which is the reason why we return it here. If we didn't, then we would only be able to subscribe to it in the actual service. So speaking of the component, we'll now go back to that, and we will actually import the post. We'll import the post service from the post service as follows. Remember, import it like so, and we will need to set up a constructor so that we can actually import this service into this component. It will be assigned to a property called post service. Set it like that, curly braces, so there's no error. And instead of logging this, we'll actually assign it to a string variable called query. And that'll be a string because that's what the event.target.value will be. Then we will use the injected service, and we will call search fruits method that we just created, and the data that we will pass into this method that will be put on the payload property of the body of the post request that gets sent to the server. That will be the query with the trim method put on it. And all the trim method does, it just removes unnecessary white space, and it's necessary because unnecessary white space could interfere with the query when we query our database, could interfere with that process. And because we returned the observable, we can subscribe to it to receive the payload property of the response, because remember, we used the map operator. We'll call it result. And inside, for now, all we will do is we will console.log results. Okay, one thing that I actually forgot to mention is that in order for the proxying to work, you'll need to go to your angular.json file, and then you'll need to scroll down. You can do that with Control F to find this serve property, and then inside you'll need to add this options object. Well, it's a property that contains an object, and inside you need to add these two properties, browse the target, and you'll need to match these values as well. In fact, just type in all of this verbatim. Well, both of these properties and values need to be written as exactly how they're written here, providing that you actually have this proxy file created, of course. And then once you've added that, you'll need to restart the Angular application with ng-serve, and then we'll go to our application. As you can see, we'll test this out here. Go to inspect console, and as you can see, we are getting back the response from the server, so we know that things are working. So this is good. That's just for testing purposes. Now we know that we've successfully established a communication between the Angular application on the front end and the server on the back end. Okay, now that we've established communication between the client and the server, we'll actually query the database on our getFruits route handler on our server. So we'll turn the callback function of the getFruits route handler into an asynchronous callback, so that we can await for querying the database, that we won't continue with the callback function until we've actually got a response from our database. And obviously we'll query the name property, since that's where all the names of the fruits are stored. And we will use this regex operator so that we can query the name property using a regular expression like so. And it will begin as specified by the caret. It must begin with whatever content is in the payload. After that can come any characters as specified by the asterisk, the dot, and then the asterisk. Well, the dot can be any character, but the asterisk is say 0 or more of these characters, it will match. And then lastly we'll use the I modifier, so that does a case insensitive search. And then we'll use the exec method on this so that we actually execute this query. And so now when we get to this point, search, because we used await, when we get to this point, it will search will actually be assigned a response in the database, because we awaited for the response. So what we'll do is, just in case we get more than 10 results, we don't want to display more than 10 results because it will just overload the user. We will limit the results to 10 using the slice method, so up to 10, and obviously it starts counting at 0, so it will get 0 to 9, obviously that will be 10 individual items, and then we will send back search instead of payload. Okay, now that we know that we're getting back an array of fruit, then we'll go to our server, and instead of having a string, we will instead use what we already showed, and we'll get back an array of fruit like we showed before, and that will come from our database. And then what we'll need to do, we'll need to go to our app component, and along with the post service, we'll import that fruit schema, and we will use it to declare property, and this property will store the response that we get back in the subscribe callback. So everything that we have retrieved from our database will be stored in this array. Okay, and then in the send data, this event handler, the one that gets activated every time we release the key on the text input, we will say will match if query is nothing or is only spaces. And what we'll do, basically we don't want to send the request if the user has either inputted nothing or if they've just inputted spaces with no characters. So what we'll do, we'll use this regular expression, and we'll say if spaces, if there's 0 or more spaces. So if they've either inputted nothing or they've inputted only spaces, then we'll be able to detect this. So if it equals the query, because if match spaces matches every single character of the query, then we will simply assign this back to nothing, this array, and then we'll return so it doesn't continue with this event handler. But if that isn't the case, then what we'll do is we will actually assign the array with the result like so. And so now we won't get this actually shown in our GUI, but if we go to the console, we should hopefully be able to see. So if we type in A, we're actually getting the responses, avocado and apple now, as you can see. And P, we should be able to, yep. And then obviously we type in gobbledygooch, then we're not going to get anything back from our database. So all we need to do now is actually update our view. So we'll go to our view, because we want to actually display the results of this array in the view. So we'll create a paragraph, and then we'll use the ng-if structural directive, and we'll say if fruits.length, remember fruits is that array property. If it's less than 1, then we'll say sorry, nothing found because we didn't find anything, obviously, because it was just an empty array, because it was less than 1, so there was nothing in it. And then we'll use the ng template, and this will be where we will render out the individual items, and the ng template doesn't actually show in the final DOM that's rendered. We use ng4, so we know that it's a loop, and then we'll declare the iterator will be called fruit, and then what we will be looping through the fruits array, and the index will be called I. I will be the index, fruit is the individual item in the array, and we'll show HR above. We'll show HR above the paragraph, but only if I is greater than 0. So not for the very first object that's being rendered out, but for every subsequent one, we will show that HR. And then obviously we'll just render out the name field inside a paragraph, like so. And so now if we go, okay, that's a bit of an error there, but we should hopefully, as you could see, we are updating. The problem that we have here is that even it's saying sorry not found before we've even made an initial search. So the way that we'll solve that is we'll simply just declare this boolean property, set it to be false because we haven't sent a query yet, and we will send a query obviously if we reach the subscribe callback. If we do, then we'll set this has query to be true, and what we'll need to do, if this is met here, then we'll just set it to be false. So if they haven't entered in anything, or if they've just entered in nothing. And we'll also set this, we'll set and has query, like so. There's the property. So now if we go back, as you can see, we're not getting that message anymore. Only if we type in gobbledygooch, then it says sorry nothing found. But if we go back, nothing there. Sorry nothing found. As you can see, avocado, pear, grapefruit. As you can see, this is exactly how it was at the very start of the video. So this is how you implement the functionality. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. And also, if you had any queries, then don't hesitate to post them down in the comments box below, and I will answer any questions that you have to the best of my ability. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it, and peace out and have a great day.